Samson's story begins long before his birth. Israel was once again under the oppression of the Philistines, who ruled over them with an iron fist. At this time, the angel of the Lord appeared to a barren woman, the wife of Manoah, and told her that she would conceive a son who would be a Nazirite from birth. This meant that Samson would be set apart for God's purposes, and he would be given extraordinary strength to help deliver Israel from their enemies. The angel also gave specific instructions for his mother. She was not to drink wine or eat anything unclean, and she was to ensure that Samson's hair was never cut, as his strength was tied to his Nazirite vow. This miraculous announcement marked the beginning of a life that would be both extraordinary and tragic. Despite the miracles surrounding his birth, Samson's life would be one of contradictions. He was a man of great power and great weaknesses, someone chosen by God to lead, but often led astray by his own desires. As Samson grew, the Spirit of the Lord began to stir him, and it became clear that he was destined for something much greater than ordinary life. Yet, from the very beginning, Samson's story would be a struggle between his divine calling and his human flaws, a tension that would define his entire life. His immense strength was matched by his personal weaknesses, and it was in the choices he made, often out of pride, impulsiveness, or temptation, that his story takes a tragic turn. Samson's early life was marked by miraculous feats of strength. One of the most famous events occurred when Samson was walking along the road and was confronted by a young lion. Filled with the Spirit of God, he tore the lion apart with his bare hands, a demonstration of his immense strength. Later, when he returned to the scene, he found that bees had made a hive in the lion's carcass, and from this he took honey and ate it. This act was significant because, as a Nazirite, Samson was not supposed to touch dead bodies. But it was just one of many times he would ignore the vows he made to God. Samson's strength was not just physical, it was also spiritual, though he often squandered it. As he grew older, Samson began to use his power for personal gain rather than for Israel's deliverance. In one instance, after the Philistines dishonored him by solving a riddle he had posed to them through deceit, Samson exacted revenge by killing 30 Philistines and taking their possessions. His violent and impulsive nature set him on a path of continual conflict with the Philistines. Though Samson was chosen by God to deliver Israel, his actions often contradicted his purpose, revealing a man torn between his divine calling and his human desires. As Samson's conflicts with the Philistines escalated, he found himself caught in a cycle of revenge and violence. One of the most significant moments in his story came when he was wronged by the Philistines during his marriage to a Philistine woman. After his bride was given to another man, Samson retaliated by catching 300 foxes, tying them together in pairs with torches, and setting them loose in the Philistine fields, burning their crops. The Philistines, furious, retaliated by killing his wife and her father. This sparked an all-out war between Samson and the Philistines, with Samson continuing to use his strength to defeat them in various battles. Samson's actions began to make him a feared and infamous figure among the Philistines. He was a thorn in their side, and they sought any means to capture him. But despite his strength, Samson's pride and impulsiveness led to his downfall. His victories over the Philistines were often temporary, and the deeper Samson fell into his pride, the more distant he became from his true calling. His strength and abilities were divine gifts, but his failure to live according to God's laws and his disregard for his Nazirite vows ultimately began to take their toll on him. Samson's greatest downfall came through his relationship with Delilah, a woman from the valley of Sorek. The Philistine rulers saw in Delilah an opportunity to finally subdue Samson, and they bribed her to discover the secret of his strength. Delilah was reluctant at first, but the Philistines promised her a large sum of money if she succeeded. Delilah began to press Samson for the secret to his strength, asking him repeatedly, but each time Samson gave her a false answer. For example, he told her that if he were bound with 7 fresh bowstrings, he would become weak. She tried it, and when the Philistines attacked him, Samson broke free, laughing at her attempt. Despite his repeated deceptions, Delilah persisted, and Samson eventually revealed the truth. His strength came from his long hair, a symbol of his vow to God. Delilah immediately had Samson's hair cut while he slept, and when he awoke, he was powerless. The Philistines seized him, gouged out his eyes, and imprisoned him in Gaza. Samson, once a mighty warrior, was now humiliated and bound. But it was in this moment of weakness that Samson would find his redemption.
Samson was blinded and imprisoned in the Philistine city of Gaza. For months, he was used as a source of mockery, his once legendary strength reduced to nothing. But even in his imprisonment, God had not abandoned Samson. As his hair began to grow back, so did his strength. During a great celebration in honor of the Philistine god Dagon, the rulers of the Philistines brought Samson out to entertain them. They mocked him, thinking he was powerless. But Samson, with his newfound strength, asked to be positioned between two central pillars of the temple. In his heart, Samson prayed to God, asking for one last act of strength to defeat his enemies. With his hands on the pillars, Samson pushed with all his might, and the entire temple collapsed, killing not only Samson but also thousands of Philistines. In this final moment, Samson fulfilled his purpose. He began the deliverance of Israel from the Philistine oppression, as God had promised. Although his life had been marked by failure and folly, Samson's final act was one of redemption. His death, while tragic, was also victorious, as it struck a blow against the Philistine rulers and demonstrated God's power even through human weakness. The story of Samson is a story of contrasts: strength and weakness, victory and failure, faith and disobedience. Although Samson's life was marred by personal mistakes, his pride, his impulsiveness, and his moral failings, God still used him to accomplish his will. Through Samson's final act, Israel's enemies were defeated, and Samson's legacy became a reminder that God can work through anyone, even those who fall short. Samson's strength was not his own, it was God's strength. And when Samson humbled himself and turned back to God in his final moments, that strength was restored. Samson's story challenges us to think about the relationship between divine purpose and personal responsibility. It teaches us that even when we fail, God can still use us for his greater purpose. But it also warns us of the dangers of pride, temptation, and neglecting our vows to God. Samson's downfall wasn't just the result of his relationship with Delilah, but of his failure to honor the God who had given him his incredible strength. Ultimately, Samson's life reminds us that God's grace is greater than our mistakes, and that he can bring victory even in our moments of weakness. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned for more Bible stories that offer valuable life lessons. Subscribe for future videos.